you for making time this afternoon to impromptu hosting to. Nautusan lang ni Shelo. So ayan, so we're here this afternoon to discuss the latest discussion paper of UPSE entitled How to Change a Constitution by Hand Waving. And Toby here, a professor here at the School of Economics, will be discussing for the most part. But other co-authors of the paper are here, including myself, Shelo, and Ogie, and Sir Florian, and Ma'am Beth. Ayan. So full force ang authors ng discussion paper. So you have any questions, we're here to help answer them. And of course, let's make this as lively and engaging as possible. So without much further ado, I pass it on to Toby to discuss the discussion paper.
I'm using this, right? Okay. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for braving the heat. Or were you here already? To come. As JC said, I'm one of 9 authors. I'm Toby Monsod, one of 9 authors, and co-authors are here, Dr. Florian Alburo. Parang I can hear myself echo. Like that? Okay. Dr. Florian Alburo, Dr. Audrey Arsenas, Shelo Magno, JC Punungbayan. Orville is supposed to be on 9. Betan, of course. Am I missing someone? No, Dr. Noel couldn't be around. Aleli, yeah, okay. No, she's not around. Okay, anyway, the discussion paper was posted April 8th. I'm just curious if anyone read it. Actually read it? Okay. No, among the students. Because it was pretty long and in 5 parts, right? The main section, however, is part 3, which I'll spend most of my time on today. So that's the outline that I'm going to do. I'll probably really do most up to number 3, and let's see how we do number 4 and 5, yeah? Okay. So the paper provides a review of the empirical evidence cited during public discussions, in particular, the recent House hearings in early March on removing the remaining constitutional restrictions on foreign equity ownership in certain economic sectors. We thought it was important to do, considering the gravity of any proposal to change the fundamental law of the land, on the one hand, and what we observed to be loose reasoning employed by some proponents on the other. 2 prominent assertions that have been made and repeated up to now are particularly troubling. First, that removing restrictions is a necessary first step or a necessary condition towards increasing FDI or stimulating economic activity. Even a representative of NEDA, when asked directly whether more FDI could be induced without amending the Constitution, if only other issues related to the ease of doing business, corruption, quality of infrastructure, etc., could be properly addressed, said no. The second assertion is that having restricting economic provisions enshrined in the Constitution rather than in ordinary laws is the main reason that the Philippines has lagged economically behind its peers in Southeast Asia. The reasoning seems to be that since the Philippines is the only country with restrictions in its constitution, and since it subsequently has been receiving the smallest portion of FDI into the ASEAN, then the former must have caused the latter, which is an obvious post hoc fallacy, if you remember. Okay? In any case, implicit in this reasoning is a belief that differences in statutory restrictions are the main factor explaining the distribution of FDI across the ASEAN. Also implicit is a belief that legislative flexibility is superior to constitutional rules when it comes to the economy. So we make 3 points in the paper, which I'm putting up front now. First, that lifting equity restrictions is not a necessary condition for explaining the inward stock of FDI in cited countries, including the Philippines. The working papers we review indicate that while restrictive equity rules may represent a hindrance to FDI, their potential effects are very small and sometimes insignificant in comparison to other explanatory variables. Second, that policymakers should take care not to assume that any and all forms of FDI will be good for national development. FDI has the potential to make a significant contribution to development in theory, but the evidence indicates that this is only if we are clear-eyed about what and from where benefits from FDI are to be expected, what the real barriers to investments are, and what supporting institutions and policies are needed so that society can derive the most benefit from it. Finally, the paper comments on the push for legislative flexibility, saying that while it's attractive on the surface, this can be self-defeating, since it also has the potential of increasing investment uncertainty, particularly given the quirks of Philippine political economy. Okay, so before I discuss the available evidence, let's first level off on two matters. First, what doors are actually shut to foreign investments? If one reads, there's what's called a foreign investment negative list that's issued every 3 years. If you see that, it will tell you, okay? The last one in 2022, it enumerates 11 activities for which no foreign equity is allowed. Of the 11, 4 are constitutionally restricted without qualification. Mass media, except recording and internet business, marine resources, and small-scale use of resources in smaller bodies of water, activities related to nuclear material, and activities related to biological, chemical, and radiological weapons. For the last two, domestic investments are also prohibited. So there's no discrimination. So that doesn't count, okay? The other 7 are actually restricted by ordinary law, okay? For instance, the practice of professions is reserved for Filipino citizens, except if subject to reciprocity as provided in pertinent laws. In other words, laws can open that up. And in fact, they have. I mean, there are exchanges with ASEAN, I think, on, if I'm not mistaken, right? Architecture and engineering, one of them. The important ones in the practice of profession as regards business services are lawyers, legal, accounting and audit, engineering and architecture. Okay. So all the others, there, cockpits, no foreign equity, private detectives, those are the ones. Okay, which means everything else has been open, right? For some time, from a partial 30% or 40% up to 100%. On your left, you will see the items, and actually there's a little more, but I didn't copy it down. But these are the ones where the equity limit, foreign equity limit is 40%. And of that list, only the first 4 are from the Constitution. Everything else, rice and corn, deep sea, etc., procurement of infra projects, that's by law. Okay? Supply of materials and goods and commodities to GOCCs, that's restricted, that's also by law, common law. All of those can actually, if opened up, potentially create economic, but it's not a constitutional matter. Okay? Everything else is 100%. Manufacturing since 97, since the beginning, right? Wholesale, retail, financial services, electricity generation, even the FTAA associated with mining is 100%, as long as the president signs it and all this, right? The second bullet, telecoms, railways, expressways, airports, and shipping were open with when they were defined as public services in 2022 by law. Okay, so just so we're clear, this one, operation of public utilities, that's for up to 40% by the Constitution, but the Constitution doesn't define public utilities. Public utilities are defined by law. Okay. Okay, what am I looking for? There. That's the target of Econ Chacha. Okay, I'm separating education and advertising. I'm just talking about the economic provision. That's the target. So the target is Section 11, Article 12, which is about public utilities, and is current and is defined. It's those five: electricity distribution, transmission, oil pipelines, water pipelines, seaports, and PUVs. Okay. Our foreign equity limitations are actually comparable to Vietnam's in the critical sectors of manufacturing, where there are no restrictions, and transportation and communication, where foreign ownership must be below 50%. Okay. And we do better than Vietnam in financial systems. So we're talking about that blue square. All of that, we're comparable or we do better. Okay. So the five manufacturing sectors, transport and communication, we are comparable. In fact, Vietnam has maintained its tightest statutory restrictions in transport since 1997. Even if its score kind of improved between 2010 and 2020. And its level of restrictions in telecoms, communications, has stayed the same since 2010, while the Philippines score dropped in 2018. I'm mentioning Vietnam because during the hearings, it was the poster boy of everything. Why can't we be with like Vietnam and all this, right? This is what they did. We have to follow, etc. But actually, we're kind of comparable on those critical sectors, which matter, I think, to manufacturing. So this begs the question: have statutory restrictions been the decisive factor in Vietnam's manufacturing miracle relative to the Philippines' mediocre performance? Okay. I don't know the answer. I'm just looking at this. Okay. Consequently, one must ask whether lifting any remaining statutory restrictions will serve the purpose of helping the country catch up or keep pace with Vietnam. Okay. A further note is everything on this side, right? In those sectors, we are more restrictive than Vietnam, and that includes well-known mass media and the primary sectors, agriculture, fisheries, and all that, where there's a 40% limitation. Because it's 40%, the scoring of this index puts us at 0.5. So that's why it's all 0.5. But note that the ones with green circles are not constitutionally restricted. That's by law. Okay, so business services, that part of agriculture, that's the part of agriculture, practice of profession. Construction is all law. It's not constitution. Hotels and restaurants, that's a question of accreditation. Okay, so it's not really true, as we have tried to point out, that obstacles are in the Constitution for these critical sectors. So the point to note is that both the executive and legislative, even before and up to now, have the opportunity to lift equity restrictions in some key sectors if only they wanted to do so. For instance, in business services, by coordinating the simplification of rules for the individual and corporate practice of professions, which is very important for our service sector as well as our manufacturing sector. Construction could have been expanded by removing barriers found in relevant laws. Tourism, by relaxing accreditation rules. Okay, I also want to level off on what is a necessary condition, because that seems to be a thing. Okay, so a necessary condition X is one that must be present for another condition Y to occur. That is, without X, Y can't occur, so Y requires X. On the other hand, a sufficient condition is anything that is capable of producing a change in Y on its own. So in this paper, we do not deny that removing ownership restrictions could result in additional inflows of FDI. What we do question, based on studies that proponents themselves have put forward, is whether those restrictions represent the main hindrance in attracting desirable FDI. Moreover, we also question whether removing equity restrictions is a precondition or prerequisite before more substantive initiatives such as addressing corruption and the ease of doing business can be addressed. In the next section, we discuss how the available evidence indicates that changing statutory restrictions is not necessary, in the sense that other sufficient conditions may operate even without these changes being made. Okay, so now we discuss the results from 3 working papers that were cited during the House hearings as providing an empirical basis for lifting equity restrictions, or in the case of the first paper by Parcon Santos, as not a basis for being against Econchacha. So the 3 papers are Parcon Santos, Amador, and Romarate, 2021. They're from BSP. They were interested in why the Philippines was lagging behind in terms of overall FDI. They were not interested in Chacha. This was not done for Chacha. The second paper is La Casa. From Congress, he's with the research unit of the House. That paper was done with the Chacha debate in mind. Finally, Mistura and Rollet is an OECD researchers. Their concern was more the unfinished liberalization agenda. It's not very comparable to the first 2. They look at 60 advanced and emerging economies and how determinants may be, but how that those determinants may be weighed by countries interested in the ASEAN is beyond the scope. We cannot infer from that. Okay. By the way, ASEAN 5 refers to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Okay. Technical note, sorry, 2 slides of technical notes. The papers employ what is called an augmented gravity model, which is the workhorse model in the empirical literature analyzing FDI determinants. In its barest formulation, the FDI gravity model posits that bilateral FDI are positively related to the product of the market size of the host and source country. So that represents supply and demand forces, yeah? And negatively related to the distance between them, geographic distance. Well, that distance also represents or accounts for transaction costs and other frictions in bilateral investments. So researchers augment the model with other research-specific variables like factors that impose investment costs, and then estimate the model using what is known as the, how do you pronounce this? Poisson, right? Poisson. You say poison? No. Poisson pseudo maximum. Okay. Okay. PPML, right? Estimator. So in the cited papers, owing to the specification of the models, almost all of the estimated coefficients are simple elasticities. So remember elasticities, right? These are unitless. They are interpreted as the percentage increase in FDI, which is your left-hand side variable, for 1% increase in, say, the equity index. A larger elasticity denotes the greater importance of a variable as a determinant. In most, the last thing is, as in most exercises of this nature, all 3 papers estimate statistical associations or correlations among variables or between the variables rather than causation. Okay, so causal effects or estimating causal effects would have required an instrumental variable strategy, which they do not do. However, the first and third papers at least undertake panel data regressions with host country fixed effects, as you know. That will, well, as a test of robustness, that will attenuate omitted variable bias, if you remember, right? So that sort of helps a little, but it's still not causation. Okay. Oh, one more, sorry. Okay, so the dependent variable is a stock measure of FDI. Okay, FDI outward position or inward FDI stock. Why a stock? Well, FDI stocks are thought to be a better capture the optimal level of capital allocation across countries than flows. So it's not a flow variable, it's a stock variable. Flows can be are sensitive to business cycles and short-term adjustments. Okay. Data is from IMF or OEC and UNCTAD. Note that La Casa draws heavily from Parcon in his model and whole approach, but the explanatory variables of La Casa are much fewer, right? It does not include some of the variables that were already shown to be significant. Mistura also uses inward M&A investment stock. That's mergers and acquisitions, investment stock. And that allows him to look at sectoral impacts, like by industry, primary, manufacturing, and services. So we can do that. All three papers use the equity index of OECD, which I showed before. Basically, that measures 22 sectors, right? And if you're completely close, your score is 1 in the sector. If you cannot go beyond 50%, your score is 0.5, and then it goes down. So the lower, the better. That's really it. Okay. Finally, yes. What do the reported results reveal about the role of statutory FDI restrictions? 3 things. The first thing is that differences in statutory foreign equity restrictions among the ASEAN 5 may help explain some of the observed distribution of FDI from source countries, but they cannot be considered as the main explanatory factor and can hardly be called necessary. Okay, and it's these 3 things, which I'll show you in the next slide. The first thing is, we say this because the equity index, do I just get this? Okay. The equity index is negative and statistically significant in the base model. So how do you read this? This is a elasticity. So a 1% improvement in the equity index is associated with a 0.5% increase in FDI outward position. Okay. So if you want it easier, 10% improvement in equity index is associated with a 5% increase in FDI outward position. The thing is, that effect weakens both statistically and economically as you add institutional and infrastructure variables, which are statistically significant in their own right. So this is this. Okay, so this is corruption perception is public governance, rule of law is public governance, EDB is ease of doing business, and then infrastructure. Okay, so when you add that, it weakens, and the effects of the added variables are stronger, implying that they are comparatively of greater importance as determinants of FDI. In fact, the coefficient of the equity index in a few specifications is statistically insignificant. Okay, this means that the measure of equity restrictiveness across ASEAN 5 does not help explain changes in the dispersion of FDI. Okay, so on the basis of those 3, if the economic charter change proposal is premised on the necessity of lifting equity restrictions as a precondition for more FDI or better outcomes, then these observations could be considered as evidence against it. Second, among the ASEAN 5, improvements in the business regulatory environment combined with improvements in infrastructure have effects on FDI that dwarf the size of those coming from any change in foreign equity restrictions. Okay. By the way, this is Parcon Santos, right? So I'm referring to, for instance, this, right? Look at that. So here, what does this mean? A 1% improvement in the ease of doing business was associated with a 1.5% increase in FDI outward stock, right? Or a 10% improvement in the ease of doing business and index is associated with a 15% increase in FDI stock. This is 3.7 times greater than that. Okay? So that's what you're comparing. 3.7 times greater than that. When you add telecoms infrastructure to, or control for it, it becomes 4.6 times greater than the effect of changing equity restrictions. So that's what we mean by it dwarfs that effect. La Casa, his equation also shows that the potential effects on FDI of improving perceptions of public sector corruption are 8 times stronger than the potential effect of lifting equity restrictions. La Casa does not highlight that result though. So these are his results. Okay. So this is the equity index elasticity of FDI with respect to the equity index. This is corruption. 6 and 0.77, that's a factor of 8 times greater. Okay. The 0.77 estimate was used in the House of Representatives to illustrate what sort of bump in FDI could be obtained if the Philippines reduced its equity index by 70% to the level of Vietnam's. Because Vietnam's equity index is 70% lower than ours, right? So it was stated during the hearings, right, the author, that improving the foreign equity restrictions score from 0.281 to 0.077 or by 70% will be equivalent to an additional FDI of 323 billion from a base of 600 billion. Okay, so 323 is 53.9% of this. Where did we get that? That's simply the coefficient times 70%, times 70. Okay, so that's how you do it. Okay. Now, one should really be careful about these illustrations because actually these estimates are average effects, right? They're not really supposed to be used, per country and per sector, but the author did it. And so all we're going to do now is say, okay, if you're going to use it that way, if you're going to, as long as estimated elasticities are to be utilized to draw attention to the potential benefits of relaxing constitutional restrictions, then the illustration must be completed by mentioning that a much larger increment in FDI can be obtained by simpler means, specifically by improving corruption perception. So a 10% improvement in the corruption perception index could potentially generate a 363 billion addition in FDI or 40 billion more than what is estimated from reducing equity restrictions by 70%. So equity restrictions reducing by 70% to the level of Vietnam versus improving corruption perception by 10%. And by our history, the reason why we say it's simpler means is because we achieved that level in 2014 without amending the Constitution. Okay, so 10% increase in corruption is from 34 over 100 to 38, and that was our level in 2014. Okay, third takeaway and final takeaway, on a global level, the reported results of Mistura indicate that the relationship between inward FDI stock and foreign equity restrictions is not straightforward. The significance of foreign equity restrictions seems to depend on the type of FDI by motivation, because there are like 4 types. You have market seeking, natural resource seeking, things like this. No, by manner of entry, meaning by merger and acquisition or brownfield or a greenfield investment, as well as by industrial sector or subsector. For instance, although statistically significant on the whole, here, for inward FDI stock, there is a negative and statistical significant relationship with the restrictiveness. Okay, the coefficient is negative 2.87, which is relatively small, but still nothing to sneeze at. Okay, that significance disappears for M&A or brown M&A investment, inward investment stock. Okay, so equity restrictions are no longer material in this case, both statistically and economically. Okay, this is the size of the coefficient of the elasticity. By industrial sector, primary, manufacturing, and services, it is also not significant. Okay. Okay. Now, the differences in the way greenfield investments versus M&A respond to equity restrictions may be especially salient in view of the decrease in the volume of the former of greenfield investments over the last 2 decades. Meanwhile, acquisitions or brownfield investments more generally have doubled as a share of FDI in low and middle income countries over the past 10 years. So all of this suggests the importance of understanding the different types of FDI and what attracts them, as well as the extent to which each type may or may not serve a country's policy goals, which brings us to the next section. Okay, so one may say, you know, since foreign equity restrictions may matter differently or not at all, etc., why not just open everything? Okay, and our position there is, well, that really assumes that really presumes that any and all FDI carry unmitigated benefits, right? That there's no costs involved. And that really is the way it has been presented in the public arena, right? It's the solution to our low saving and investment ratio. It's a source of technology, a driver of better jobs. It will stop OFWs from going away. Diba, meron pang ganon eh. Diba? And so it's pretty magical in that sense, right? So let's just take a look. Okay, so this prevailing belief among policymakers that FDI is a sine qua non, meaning you can't have development without it, right? Started in the 70s and 80s, right? So basically, the current belief is that it's not only a direct and debt-free source of capital financing, but also a means to transform a country's production and employment structures and accelerate GDP growth. So M&Es, that's multinational enterprises, are assumed to be better equipped with best practice and so forth, you know, which can improve a country's productivity. So there's supposed to be positive externalities which can lead to increased returns and long-run growth. So knowledge and technology transfers are expected to be the most important mechanism through which FDI promotes growth in host economies. So that's in the 70s and 80s, right? Much time has passed since then, and the profession has actually tested hypotheses about this. So far, the verdict is that on the whole, and not for lack of trying to find it, consistent evidence of the positive effects of FDI on host economies has proved elusive. Okay. Growth limiting effects of FDI can exceed growth enhancing effects of FDI. So it's not all benefits. There could be cost distortions, etc., which are amplified and so forth, right? Evidence on the existing of positive productive externalities has also been sobering. Okay. So basically, at this time, one can say, or one has posited that it is actually not a condition sine qua non for development. Okay, and this is my last slide really. This is the macro-empirical literature. There's macro-empirical and micro-empirical. The macro-empirical literature on FDI tries to find the causal link between FDI and growth, and hasn't been able to find much support. So it's no or only weak support for the claim that FDI per se accelerates economic growth. FDI can be growth enhancing. This is like the conventional wisdom, only if certain local conditions and absorptive capacities are present, which could be trade openness, a minimum level of human capital, a minimum health of financial markets, and yeah, those three. Also, more recent literature has shown that effects have varied over time and we're not sure if it holds. Why? Because everything has changed, right? With global value chains and so forth, right? So the way it was done before has shifted. So it's not very clear if the same kind of, spillovers will occur and so forth. Having said that, of course, the empirical literature, when I say empirical, it's like 30 years worth of, everyone's been trying to do that. If you Google Dow FDI and you get 5,000 articles. So, there's meta-analysis upon meta-analysis of FDI and growth. Anyway, so what is found, the takeaway is that FDI spillovers are context-specific, not unconditional, and not without cost. In other words, not every multinational enterprise is a good source of externalities, and not every domestic firm is equally well placed to benefit from multinational activity, which is the premise, right, of the endogenous growth model and so forth, right? So the implication is that governments seeking to maximize benefits from FDI must ensure domestic absorptive capacity exists and that inward M&E activity results in positive externalities. The big example of how it could go wrong, right? Well, it's not an outlying example, is China in Africa, right? I mean, there's very little, there are very little linkages being formed. China brings its own people in, which they also do here, though that's POGO, right? Actually, I don't know. The illegal, yeah. So, that means that those spillovers will not happen, right? Which is the whole premise of FDI and so forth. So, okay. I think I'm going to stop here, right? And if we can talk more about the other stuff in the paper as we go along. We also had a rejoinder, by the way. So I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, Toby, for that presentation. I guess for many students here, this is a crash course on how to read econometrics tables, regression results. Okay, so at this point, siguro we can take some questions from the audience. I'm sure some of you are waiting for this moment. So if you have any questions, even participants on Zoom, by the way, we have some participants there. You're very welcome as well to ask away. So dito sa ating in-person audience, do you have any questions you would like to ask? Yes.
Hello to everybody. Suppose that the constitutional restrictions on FDI are not abolished or decreased to any degree. Are there any other alternative methods to improving FDI, or is the abolishment of the restrictions our only way? Is the abolition of FDI restrictions our only way to improve FDI?
In fact, that's what we're saying, right? If you the papers all show that there are other factors that can do that, right? And maybe have stronger effects, like on the front of corruption, ease of doing business, infrastructure quality.
Sorry, what's your name again and your affiliation?
Actually, I'm a high school student.
Oh, nice.
And my name is Sean Patrick Cruz. I study at PLMAR Senior High as a UM student.
Nice. Thank you for coming all over here. So, okay, thank you so much. Okay, any other question from the audience here? Yes? Sige, lalapitan ka ni Kuya Roland. Yan. Your name, please?
I'm Francine po. I'm a student in UPSE. Ma'am, since you mentioned po that improving corruption perceptions would have a like 8 times stronger effect on improving FDIs than lifting 40 equity, what does improving corruption perception necessarily look like from like the government's perspective or an economic policy orientation perspective?
Well, the way it's described, the corruption, this is by Transparency International, right? I think they combine many surveys. So it's really a perception of corruption, right? That it's not a objective measure of corruption. I think the fact that we got to that level in 2014 says a lot, diba? So one can ask, why did it go down? You know, can I just also add, what's your name, sweetie?
It's Sean Cruz.
Okay. No, there's been recently an example of how it happened without changing the constitution, right? The whole of renewable energy. Are you familiar with that? That was actually described in the House, right? In terms of, oh, look what will happen if we remove the restrictions, so much. And it's true. But that happened without the constitution. What happened there was that they corrected the IRR of the renewable energy law in 2022. So the renewable energy law since 2008, right, sort of restricted it inadvertently, so that renewable energy was associated with a natural resource or what they call potential energy, and therefore could not be, foreign equity could not enter. Okay, so it was treated, right? It was treated as a natural resource, when actually it's kinetic energy, right? Therefore, it is not exhaustible and it's inexhaustible. And by that change, right, it changed the landscape of RE. But that wasn't constitutional, right? That was a review of existing rules, right? Due diligence. First of all, guys, we know what anyone who has been in government or has read these reports actually know where there are bottlenecks, whether it's NTC, the National Telecom Commission. The issue there is sometimes the independence of the regulator faced with, big business, okay, things like this. And so the contention is there are many things that are stopping FDI that have nothing to do with the Constitution.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions here in the audience? Yes.
Hi, good morning. Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. Christian Bernardo, I'm not actually a student yet, but would like to ask in the BPO industry, if in case of Chacha if the constitution has been already made, are there any heads up for us BPO professionals in regards to the stakes, risk or stakes for the investors to keep on keeping with the operations here in the Philippines? What is your say on that? Would it affect us in the BPO industry?
Does anyone, you mean lifting restrictions or not lifting? Would it affect? I don't think so. There's no restrictions on BPO. I don't think. Okay. Dr. Magno, anyone? Dr. Florian?
Government investment in human capital will have a more significant effect in the BPO sector than lifting the constitution, because right now it's already liberalized. So if the government wants to sustain our competitiveness in the sector, the government has to invest in the technology available in the sector, making sure that rents, the rental of space has gone up because of POGOs. If we stop POGOs, that will reduce the demand for space. That will make our country more competitive in the BPO sector. And the third one would be investment in human capital, because we have to transition to make sure that we transition from just being a call center capital to knowledge processing, so that AI doesn't replace the sector. So if we want to do that, that's where we should put our energy instead of changing the constitution.
I think we have a question from Zoom. She messaged me. So Jeff Daniel Lauron is asking on Zoom, for the common Filipino who might care more about helping their household get by over keeping in tune with national issues, what should they ultimately take away regarding economic chacha as though it is a current gut issue? Are there certain pressing situations that the ordinary Filipino should worry about if this chacha would push through, besides overlooked economic and labor conditions and agrarian issues like displacement of farmers due to foreign ownership of land?
Try? That's a hard.
Governance
You want to-
issue.
You first.
There will be no impact on the gut issues of Filipinos if we're going to lift the charter change. There's no positive. There's negative, because it takes away the time of policymakers to focus on more important issues that will have an effect on our welfare. So I think that's more of an opportunity cost and the expenses that Congress is incurring in discussing this and prioritizing Chacha than focusing on other more important issues. For example, the recent ban on GMO, right? That will have a significant effect on price. We expect inflation to happen soon, but if Congress will focus its energy on discussing Chacha instead of formulating regulation with respect to GMO, then that will be a problem, right?
Yeah, I agree. No, I think the problem with, I think what's happening is that there are many promises being made that are attached to lifting restrictions, right? You'll have better jobs, right? Hindi na pupunta ng Saudi yung ano mo, di ba? Dito na yung mga OFWs. That is what is happening, and I think I think that's dangerous in that sense. I think that I know it could be far removed, right? But I think if there is a way, I think communications campaigns should be done. Right now, by the way, I think only 25%, many are aware, 70% of this effort to change the constitution, but only 25% say they have sufficient knowledge, right? Everyone else doesn't. And I think that, even though it may not be a gut issue at this time, it's important, or else one can get hijacked by a signature campaign, right? And so I as much as possible, we still have to demand that we talk about it, especially if there's things going on up here. But what Shadow said was very salient, that the more that people are working on this, basically, I think, in the rejoinder that we got, it said it's more expeditious, right? That's what they said. It will take too long to work on corruption, let's just do this. So for many of them, it's almost like, let's look here because the light is here. We lost something, but let's look there kasi nandyan yung ilaw. When actually it got lost over here, right? So it's misplaced there. And meanwhile, the important laws that can lower prices in terms of telecoms, etc., are not being dealt with, and that is what can help. That is what can help the gut issue.
Alex, you would want to introduce yourself first, and then quick question.
Alex Escucha. I'm no longer a student. Student number 73 something. So refreshing to be here. But my question is long. Eh. No. Anyway, just to tap on the point of Cielo, if they're really talking about a gut issue, I've been monitoring the inflation rate for the last 2 years every month. And I'm most interested about the inflation rate for the bottom 30%. 80% of the inflation of the bottom 30% is all about food and transportation. Okay, so that's the real gut issue, if there is one. Okay. I have two sets of questions on the study. One is on the methodology. The other is certain discussion issues which have been brought up with our friends and fellows in FEF, of which I am also a member. Okay. And Dean Raul is also a member. I'm just curious whether just for the rigor of the equation, whether you've tested yung FDI variable, and you said you chose to stick with the stock issue, with the stock as a measurement, whether there's a difference between measuring it as a first difference or as a flow, whether there's any statistical improvement. Because normally, in some other studies that I've looked at, is really the determinants of whether there's an increase in the flow or a decline in the flow. That would be more determinative. Number two, I'm curious because on one of the first early charts, you said there's a precisely here that we're quite close to Vietnam, almost close to Vietnam. However, in one of the later charts, there is a statement, a number that says if you benchmark the index, the restriction to the Vietnam, it represents an improvement of 70%. So intuitively, you're saying, malapit tayo sa Vietnam, yung pala, pag tinapat mo sa Vietnam, it's an improvement of 70%. Ang laki din pala ng impact.
Actually, I said, malapit tayo sa blue box. Here. These are the sectors that we are comparable or better. Using the OECD index. These are the
Only in that portion.
yes, and these are the sectors where manufacturing, telecoms, transport, etc., are present. Banking, financial services are present. These are where, by the OECD index, Vietnam is more restrictive. Okay, and this is by the Constitution, media, and the primary sectors. And these are not by the Constitution. Those are by the laws. Okay. Electricity is a funny thing. This is actually generation, both Vietnam and us is zero. I mean, in other words, totally open. This represents distribution. We are 0.5, Vietnam is 0. But that could be because of a quirk of, the index is not perfect. The index doesn't know how to treat state-owned and operated enterprises. So it just says 0. But actually, Vietnam's electricity distribution is completely state-owned. You can't have foreign equity in it, but it's still 0.
So the presence of NGCP in our transmission system would count for that 0.5?
I think I'm not sure what it is. No, this is 0.5 is simply because by the Constitution, public utilities is 40%. Okay, so that means it's 0.5. The average of 0.5 and 0 is 0.25. That's what this is.
Sorry, additional comment. On the corruption, my problem with that index is that number one, it is a perception. Number two, it is not actionable. Kasi ano ibig sabihin pag say reduce corruption by 10%? Diba? The perception. Diba? Kaya nga yung actionable mo dun eh. Ibig sabihin yung yung cut sa projects na 40%, babawasan mo na lang to 30%. Parang ganun ba? It's so difficult kasi nga, in other words, Cielo having been in government, paano mo siya ita-translate into an actionable policy or action handle talaga? Di ba? That's part of the problem. Lalo na ito, elasticities pa. So, twice removed ka. No? I mean, sorry, but I'm just trying to situate the study kasi na but before you respond, kasi the real question is, I've attended every single ex-NEDA forum here, di ba? And the main question I had for Jerry Sikat was, if you had to do it all over again, what would be the single most important thing you would have done? And he said, open the country to foreign investment. Jerry Sikat, of course, he's one of those who support Chacha, no? But again, this goes back to the issue. Talaga bang okay. Now that if we move it, kasi I don't want the discussion to end. Okay, sinabi niyo kailangan. Sabi namin hindi kailangan. So what? Di ba? Saan na tayo pupunta? Now, the big picture is this. We are all want to have the same goal, that to improve economic development, of which foreign investment is arguably one of the components. But there are many factors that affect it, of which the removing the restrictions may be one, but not the only, or not even the necessary component. Now, in market research, there is such a thing as column 1 is a factor. And then column 2 is how important is that a factor? Because you multiply column 1 by column 3, then you will say, in this case, we should devote our resources to item 1, 2, 3 kasi this is the most important. Meaning, if you use the same resources, the impact will be highest with this. No? Is that supposed to be a good next part to this study, where if you have a finite resources and you have a very long wish list, we have had a very long wish list for the last 50 years. Where would you put that? Kasi meron kang mga relative impacts, di ba? Yung if you go to the last equation where you showed restriction, ito lang. But if you add the others are more important. And say, is there a next step to that to say, okay, let's devote more resources to this, more resources to that? In terms of allocating resources or policy attention. Yung last na, I think you have a last, yung equation mo where all the elasticities and all the coefficients are shown. Yes. I think it's in the last slide. Like, improving infra is better, or ease of doing business is better. Di ba? In which case, you can sort of break it down into more actionable items. Yung may equation, yung last slide yata. Yeah, that one. Yan, that one.
Wait, Alex, first of all, okay, we didn't do these runs. I'm just reporting the runs of 3 papers that were presented by proponents of Chacha. Okay, so what we're doing is we're looking at these papers and providing a more complete appreciation of the results. Okay, so that's all we're doing, because it was being represented in a different way, and it was, especially like the estimate of, for instance, the estimate of saan ba yun? Ito, La Casa, right? They use this to say that we could get 323 billion more, and we're saying that, why don't you also mention this? That's all. right? In other words, if you're going to show your results, show it completely. That's all we're saying. Okay. So Parcon actually did not, Parcon Santos did not write, they wrote the paper in 2021. They didn't have Chacha in mind. What was happening is, people, were saying with that, is this paper evidence that can be used against Chacha? And, they were, proponents were saying, no, it's just, and we're saying that actually, if your assertion is that it is necessary, then yes, because the results show it's not. That's all. That's all we're doing. I think so. If you really look at it, right? That's all. We're all, if you have the more complete, if you read the papers, you'll see it. Maybe, sometimes people tend to just, see a significant variable and run with it. But if you read the whole thing, even, Mistura and Role, it's a richer, the results are richer, in that sense. Yeah. I'd like to respond to the thing about corruption is not actionable. I think it is. It's public sector, perception of public sector corruption. I've been in government. I know people, good people who have been in government, who by virtue of their example, improve the perception of corruption of their agency and whatever. So I don't think we should hold it up as something mystical and unachievable, right? We actually got there in 2014. It just went down after, and what happened in between? There was an administration that did not help it, right? So let's not say just because we cannot have a outright policy that it's not valid as something to pursue. And we're not asking for a utopia, as we said in our rejoinder. Saying, we can improve it. Someone else?
Yeah. But there are actually actionable policies that can improve the state of, that can minimize corruption in the country. If you computerize the Bureau of Internal Revenue, minimize the interaction between the tax admin people and the business sector, I'm sure that will have a significant effect. If we have a legit FOI law in this country, that will have a significant effect. The availability of data on how we monitor the budget, that will have a significant effect. And I think, so the behavior and the pronouncement of the head of agents of the country and its agencies will have a significant effect on the perception. Right? No, we don't. We only have an executive order issued by, we don't. EO lang siya. That the president can change anytime. That's why some items, like for example, local governments are not covered. Now, people who use the road, pag naka-VIP, that's now confidential, according to the FOI.
And I think that there are certain things, if you don't mind me saying, that do not help, right? I mean, if you have a drug campaign that kills numerous people, that doesn't help with corruption perception. If you shut down a franchise like ABS-CBN, that looked like a little, I don't know, it looked a little vindictive, that doesn't help. So I think that, I think it's very, I think it's too easy to say, no, that's, we'll always have corruption, we can't do anything about it. I feel it's dishonest.
Yeah, siguro wearing my hat as one of the co-authors of this paper, siguro if I may add as well, there was actually a distinct reduction of the corruption perceptions index during the Aquino administration, if you check the data. And that was a significant decline, by the way, and that was also occasioned by a significant increase of FDI. But of course, we need to do causal studies pa on that, to what extent the increase of FDI was really about the improved corruption perceptions. But I think there's something there. Alex, at the same time, if you look at this table alone, it already tells you clues about what's the next steps. Like when you look at the human capital index, education and health, the magnitude of the elasticities are much larger pa nga. Okay, 2.399 and then 10.85, both in the Parcon Santos and La Casa papers. Compare that with the equity index, the absolute value of the coefficients, ang liit nung sa equity index. So, I guess this is our best way of quantifying yung relative importance of yung next steps that you were mentioning. Like, we just need to improve human capital as well as yung corruption perception, ease of doing business. And I think these are actionable by themselves. Anything to add sa mga Sige, or any other question from the audience? Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lance Ordas. I'm a student in UPSE. This one's a little more on the literature, and since I'm just a little curious, are there any studies that estimate the effects of lifting equity restrictions on sectors that are only restricted by law and those restricted by the Constitution? Since I think this could also be a point of discussion that could possibly further point out how Econ Chacha is not really necessary, that we could improve if they want to like improve equity restrictions, then maybe we can just do this instead.
No, unfortunately not. The sectoral, it's very hard to get specific sectoral data on FDI. It's just not there. It's too fine. But I think if you read, you know that it's ironic. There's a World Bank report on concentration of industries, right? And what's making it concentrated. You'll see that most of it is rules, right? Behavior of regulators, rules, etc., which is actually well known, right? In terms of the telecoms industry, it's like everyone knows that the regulator is in a bind or is captured. Let's just say what it is, no? So for me, it's not a mystery in terms of these things. Transportation sector, most people know what that is. The mess of the transport sector. How many agencies are in charge of roads and they don't even talk? Diba? These are all actionable by the executive and the legislative.
Okay, yes. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Christine. I also am a student from UPSE. I have two sets of questions. The first one is, joint ventures have jumped by 40% internationally based on The Economist. If restrictions are lifted, how do you think the rate of joint ventures entering the Philippines will be affected?
Sorry, joint ventures have decreased.
They've increased internationally by 40%. So that means mergers and acquisitions have somehow declined based on the joint venture percentage.
I'm not, I don't know how to, as we said that, many things can, first of all, FDI is already coming in. So I'm not sure what you're saying. If you lift the equity restrictions, will there be more joint ventures?
Yes.
Well, as we said, no, we don't deny that lifting restrictions could result in more FDI. What we disagree with is the representation that it's a necessary condition. That's what we disagree with.
Just to follow up, do you think that if we focus more on, for example, improving our corruption index, do you think charter change may actually be beneficial in the long run after we've solved these major issues such as corruption, infrastructure, etc.?
It's
I'm so sorry. I was just I can't help myself. I was trying not to say something, but there's certain basic things I think that you must remember. When firms do anything, it's about profit. So if they want to get into a merger or an acquisition or whatever, the target is to make profit. And perhaps the question is, how would this equity restriction change the possibility of making a profit? Or is it something else that will create the profit for them? Could it be the corruption? Could it be the uncertainty and all of those things? So don't forget that it's very, very basic in microeconomics and firm theory that the objective of the firm is really to make profit. The next is that I just have a problem with people always trying to change the Constitution. It's like, why do you hate the Constitution so much that you have to find some flimsy excuse, like trying to make things profitable or whatever, just to change the Constitution? What is it? What is it that you're really trying to change? Because obviously, it's not about the profitability of the firm. So again, we just go back to that question. What is it for the whoever is authoring these changes? Why do you want to change the Constitution so much? And just keep that in mind, I guess, because that's what I keep in mind. Every time that Congress is trying to change the Constitution again, or whoever is trying to author another constitutional change, my question is, who are you really trying to, or who's really going to benefit from this change? So I get tired of all the discussion about, if this is going to change, again, if we change the Constitution, etc., etc. So I just like to encourage everyone to think a little bit more deeply about the situation. Thank you.
I think in a way, the conversation has been hijacked by this, right? I mean, there's so many more important things we need to discuss, which we know. But as Shelo said, everyone's attention is there. We're hoping that, let's just get rid of the premise that it's necessary. If you get rid of that premise, unless they, maybe there's someone with another set of results that will show it's necessary. But until that time, can we not say it's necessary? That's all. Can we also acknowledge that the reason why FDI, first of all, the performance of FDI may be smaller, relatively small, could be because of other factors. And the papers actually show, empirically, econometrically, to the best that they can, that in fact, there are other factors that have stronger or have a bigger influence on the distribution of FDI in the ASEAN. I think that's a fact, at least from these results.
Thank you. Sige. Sige, let's ask muna other people. Sige. Please introduce yourself.
Renzo Rodriguez from Punong Bayan and Arroyo. Also former student of UPSE. So former student of Dr. Monsod, Econ 11 and Econ 131. Of Dr. Arsenas, Econ 172. 2016 po ako graduate, so matagal na. Haven't been on UPSE classroom in 8 years. Okay, happy to be back. I can attest to the fact that companies do definitely are profit motivated regardless of whatever values they claim to espouse or stand for. I just wanted to ask yung question about conveniently dito tayo sa slide na to. Second point on the right column, growth limiting effects of FDI can exceed growth enhancing effects. Can you give some specific examples of what these growth limiting and growth enhancing effects are? Okay, thank you. Growth limiting and growth enhancing of FDI.
The growth limiting, in the literature, the growth limiting effects are, for instance, if there are pre-existing distortions, right? In prices, in trade, etc., FDI in some cases can become counterproductive. Why? Because it could amplify those distortions and therefore slower growth. Make growth slower. Distortions may bias FDI in favor of sectors which are not the comparative advantage of countries. Right? That's the issue of incentives and all that. Diba? So that could have a perverse effect. There's issues like repatriation of profits. There are issues, competition effects, which, it's not a protective thing, right? But it could increase cost. For example, if there are scarce inputs, labor, etc., that can increase input costs for everyone, and therefore, domestic firms may get the short end of the stick in that sense. So there are a number of things in the literature as regards that in terms of growth. The growth enhancing is the so-called, where did it go? Sorry. Ito, growth enhancing. Diba? The assumption that MNEs, multinational corporations, have best practice, and somehow, there'll be knowledge and technology transfers that will spill over. That is all the growth enhancing stuff. Okay. Source of capital, yeah, basically that's it. Which the evidence is that it's highly context specific. Remember, in theory, endogenous growth theory, this is theory. But how it works and whether it works is an empirical matter, always. And you try to figure out why, right? And so the empirical matter, the empirical literature is saying that actually it's highly context specific. Whether or not these spillovers will occur is highly context specific. And they're saying it does not actually occur horizontally, right? In other words, it doesn't spill over to competitors. I said that was one of the theories, no? The competitors will follow you, etc. And so, but it's more like backward linkages, not forward linkages. So there are many nuances to it, but the literature shows that it's context specific, right? Which means that one cannot just assume that you open the door, FDI will come and we'll have better jobs and there'll be no more OFWs. Diba? You can't. And so the actual prescription or the recommendation in the literature is countries must have a more discriminatory approach to FDI, right? Look for quality. Make sure you get, where did it go? Multinationals, where there could be positive externalities, right? Make sure your domestic firms are prepared to absorb spillovers when they occur. Diba? Otherwise, you lose it. You lose it. By the way, Vietnam is, there, and I'm not an expert on Vietnam, but the little I've read is that it's not hunky-dory. Labor productivity is not really growing in Vietnam as much as one assumes. Okay, so the spillovers are, there are problems there too, in that sense. And so,
Okay, ma'am, you have a question.
I'm kind of nervous. Kasi I'm an educator and I struggle with your terms. But anyway, hindi ba we're distracting ourselves? Kasi 2 years ago during the People's Initiative, then they found out nahuli ang ating Congress na they really want to extend their limit terms. And so they have to come up, kasi napahiya na sila, so they come up with this economic lifting the restrictions. And all of us are jumping into this whole thing. That's why you are giving this paper, so we can be enlightened. But as what the Mr. said, na, what is the problem with the Constitution? And but why are we allowing ourselves to be distracted? Alam naman natin ang nangyari sa People's Initiative. And then I talked to a lawyer yesterday, they don't really care sa education, and it's really the terms na ma-extend yung limits nila. BBM will go for 5 years, he can be re-elected, and then That's the real issue. But we are allowing ourselves to go into this, and in education will be involved. 100% na ang foreign ownership ng institution. They can come in and start their own curriculum, and yung mga mayayaman ang can come in to enroll sa schools na lahat yung mahirap. So anyway, I hope I'm not irrelevant. I'm not an economist. I'm an educator.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I guess kapag matuloy ito, hintayin natin yung Harvard Quezon City or something like that. Something to that effect. Or Stanford Caloocan or something. Anyway, sige. Yes.
Can I just say, ma'am, yeah, when we were, just so everyone, when we were writing it, and that's why we say it in the paper, right? We're well aware that people are saying this is a red herring, right? We're well aware that people are saying this could be a Trojan horse, okay? But it's something that we can still put to rest or address just to at least improve the tenor of the debate on this matter, okay? In other words, there could be, and ideally there is, if there is a serious effort to study whether or not there are, deep determinants of our structural development trajectory, then let's do it properly. Right? That's all. Let's do it properly because it's important. It's not something that you just wake up one day and then all of a sudden there's a people's initiative, right? It's like, no, if we want to study, if we want to take a look at, whether or not our trajectory is influenced by certain things in the Constitution, then let's do it properly. So this is just one little segment of it. And we're not taking a position on whether it's a red herring or Trojan horse. That's not for us to say. Okay? But we can at least address what we feel to be a conversation that is very loose, that does not appreciate the evidence or use the evidence. That's all. On Econ Judge.
Okay, thank you. Sige, before that, siguro, as we take our last few questions, to give you a sense of the impact of this discussion paper, of course, this triggered, you may have read already the rejoinder of the Foundation for Economic Freedom, and then in response, mayroong rejoinder din yung authors of this paper. You can download both the original paper and the rejoinder from the UPSE website. It's an interesting debate. Rufus Rodriguez, Representative Rodriguez commented on this. You may have seen the news item on this. Sabi niya, this group of academics from UPSE is anti-development, anti-employment, anti-economic progress, and anti-poor. So lahat ng anti...
Anti-OFW.
Anti-OFW na rin, siguro. Okay, so ayun. Natitrigger yung mga lawmakers who are proponents of economic research.
We're also labeled anti-FDI.
Ayun, yeah.
Right? And it's like, what? How did that happen? Because we're saying, no, it can contribute. There's no question, but we have to be smart about it. Right? We have to make sure that we can maximize it when it comes.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Ma'am Corina.
I just want to ask Rufus Rodriguez why he allowed his son to study at the UP School of Economics and graduate. He was miseducated.
Trust Ma'am Corina to give all the tea. She knows all the tea. Sige. I guess what this paper is trying to do is just promote a more critical discussion and a critical assessment. Kasi
we're trying, and I'm not sure, there's really no room for labeling and name calling, right? We're really just saying, listen, here is the evidence. If you have better evidence, great. But let's talk on that level. Let's not hand wave. That's why the title, right? Let's not hand wave and say, no, it will have good jobs and, we'll stop OFWs from going out. That's what we mean by hand waving.
One last quick comment from Alex.
Kina-qualify mo palaging quick, hindi naman quick eh. One technical comment lang on the methodology. I'm curious because the proxy for friction cost friction cost of investment is distance. Yeah. You mean there are other proxies for the cost of the investment?
No, no.
Okay.
Proxies for what could impinge on investment costs.
Okay.
Okay, so geographic distance. There's that common colonizer bit, and things like
Okay. So it's a matrix pala. It's a vector. Okay. The second item is moving forward. I'm not sure whether the model can accommodate the context of, for example, if you look at the last 50 years, where investments, for example, Japan started with low value and then moved up the manufacturing chain. Then South Korea did the same, and China did the same. The key differentiator in China is that because their market is so huge, it was the only market that the automakers like GM allowed complete transfer of technology, which they wouldn't allow anywhere else because they thought the market is so big enough. We could not do that in the Philippines. The other context I have is that with the ASEAN free trade, for example, the tariff barriers within ASEAN, it means there is one ASEAN market. So we lost the Ford stamping plant for meaning the production of cars and vehicles for the ASEAN market is now centralized in Thailand because of the market and the ecosystem of suppliers, which Joe Stiglitz referred to in his dissertation in the Eastern Seaboard, di ba? That's where the complex of suppliers to support your manufacturing is there. Now, more recently, because of the diversification from China, Vietnam is benefiting from that, and Indonesia also. And Vietnam and Indonesia, India, for example, is starting to produce the lower models of iPhone. Meaning, this is a global supply chain issue. I'm just wondering whether there's a way for this model to capture the dynamics of that. Umiling na si Beth eh. Because that would be a very good way to sort of, kasi we keep asking the question, we saw already the example of Japan, we saw already the example of Korea, and then tapos magugulat tayo na iwanan na tayo ng Vietnam, maya mauliwanan na naman tayo ng Cambodia. And we're asking the same question.
No, I think Adrian looked at global value chains. We refer to him. Maybe you can take a look at this paper. That's a different conversation altogether. And yeah, we cite him in the paper. I wish he was. Is he watching? Anyway, but his paper is available. I think he looks at Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, a small group of countries on the global value chain, and some of his conclusions are in our paper. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just to put the context to that, kasi number one natin na exports is semiconductors. Our number one export is also semiconductors. If you sort of check against this figure, we are really just a net labor exporter. We import what we process, and even in the central bank, the way they do the customs valuation. Electronic exports is basically a import added export only, not pure merchandise export in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
The computation of trade value added has grown tremendously in the last 10 years. And the methodology is cutting edge. It's available in the annual publication of Asian Development Bank. You can have it by country, you can have it by product, you can have it by industry. Whether that value added is foreign or domestic. And they're basically just two. It's either return to labor or return to capital. Just go to everything is at our fingertips. Global value chain, and if you have time series data, you will see whether the country is climbing from the low niche of the value chain up to the middle and up, up, up. If you read also Adrian's publication, he has the data also, but the most difficult part there is to have the consistent time series using the same methodology. I have some, but my data is only up to 2017. Backward and forward. Backward and forward.
Yeah, that's a whole different. Sweetie, go ahead.
Hello po. Good afternoon. I'm Anthony Rank from College of Arts and Letters, Philippine Studies. From what I understand kasi is that parang nagkakaroon lang ng palitan ng opinion, like sinasabi nitong ng isang side na kapag inopen natin yung FDI ay maraming OFW na papasok. Sorry. Kapag binuksan yung FDI, sorry po, pag binuksan po yung FDI, mababawasan na po yung OFW, like that. And then sinasabi naman po dito, it's context specific. Pero yung question ko lang po is why not just open the market so we can see the players, parang if there are any foul doon sa nangyayari doon sa competition of players ay maayos natin yung foul doon instead of being just context specific. Why not let just see how the market will play out in this market, like that. Thank you.
I think, and you can join in, right? I mean, first of all, the market is open. Just so we're clear, you know what I mean? Did you see the figures? And in fact, manufacturing is totally open, and still FDI is tepid. That's the whole point, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Just to add, like kunyari 100% natin yung FDI, yun yung ibig kong sabihin dun sa open the market. I'm sorry po for confusion. O yan, ownership po doon.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole debate, right? You know what I mean? And again, we're saying that it's not a necessary condition. That's all we are really objecting to, the representation that it is a necessary condition. That's all, that's the whole debate. Should we, or etc. Ogie, go ahead.
No, it's just that may cost. Everything that's being proposed may cost. Papalitan mo yung equity restriction, may cost. Hindi mo papalitan, may cost. So ang tanong lang doon is, what is the cost that's acceptable that will have the least impact or negative impact on society? And I'll just say that this is my own point of view, para hindi naman kasama yung authors, is that it is too costly to keep tampering with the Constitution like this. That if you're going to have, or if you're going to, work on the Constitution again, it has to be something so important, so urgent, that there's no other way but to really change the Constitution before you change the Constitution. That it should be the last resort instead of the first line of offense. No, kasi that's the only thing, no? Kasi yes, you're right. Bakit hindi na lang natin palitan yung equity restriction? Just let everyone in. But the point is that everything has a cost. And the cost, my point of view, and I'll just say that it's my point of view, the cost is too high. And so that's why we want to make this as the last resort if there is no other way. And what we're saying is that, but there is another way. So before we get and change the Constitution again, that, let's explore all the possibilities first. Kasi nga costly siya. May cost yan. And what the costs are, pag-isipan mo na lang. What are the potential costs if you keep changing the Constitution? What are the potential risks, the dangers of changing the Constitution? Hindi na nga namin, I think it was emphasized by Toby earlier, na hindi na namin ginalaw yung part ng what could be the motive behind changing the Constitution. Because that might be it. No? So I guess that's the point lang naman. So that's why we're saying, tingnan muna natin yung inyong economic argument kasi that seems to be the the point. Parang mas iba approach ngayon eh. Hindi na yan it's not about term limit or anything. It's about the economy is stupid. Di ba? Parang ganoon. So is it really about the economy? Or is it something else? Ganun lang naman. So let's look at the arguments. So tinignan yung arguments.
I think on the other end, I mean, the assertions being made precisely is that the problem of the country is the Constitution. That is the basic thing that is being pushed. If I'm, as written by columnists, right? That's and that's a very strong statement to say that that is the fundamental problem of the country. And so I think we have to, we're saying, hold on, let's just think more deeply about what that is, right?
Yeah, siguro just to add as well that even some lawmakers have already started to float the idea of changing the political provisions as well of the Constitution. Like si Senator Robin Hood Padilla, who sabi niya, bakit utay-utay? Lahatin na natin, sabi niya essentially. So I guess that adds to the risk of tampering with the Constitution. And for what? For advertising, for higher ed, not even entire education system, higher ed pa nga lang nga ang gusto nilang galawin eh. And then public utilities na meron ng batas na nagpapaluwag para doon, pero merong Supreme Court challenge. So ayun, so parang again, going back to Augie's point na may costs and benefits to all of these proposals, pero from many economists' assessment, parang yung costs really outweigh the benefits of economic.
At least we're saying, and by the way, we did not include education, and that's a whole different paper, right? So we didn't do that. We tried, but it was too big, right? So, but I think the impression being given is that it's all benefit. That's the problem, right? Yeah. But the impression being given is that it's this magic formula, or no, not really. Is that it can only be beneficial. That is the impression being given, and the weight of the evidence says otherwise, right? There will be, as Augie said, there could be costs because FDI can have growth limiting, effects and growth enhancing effects. Everyone just looks at the enhancing effects, ignoring that there could be perverse effects. That's all, right? And that's our role as economists to,
Okay, on that note, it's 5:38. Just a quick question ba? One last very quick question. Sige, yun na yung
by the way, there's food. We have food in
Yeah,
the
may pagkain, guys.
Good evening, everyone. It's not really much of a question, but I'd just like to share yung sentiments ko lang rin siguro, like to regular people, like the girl with the blue glasses. Parang we're not quite aware sa mga terminologies. We're not that technical sa mga most stuff. And parang one of the things I learned tonight lang is it's kind of clear na parang if ever man they want to do a cha-cha, there's no convincing reason as to why it should be done. Parang yun yung sinasabi nila. And then what's happening probably now is we're throwing a bunch of papers at each other, looking for evidence and then looking for counter evidence sa mga bagay. And maybe yun yung sentiment ng guy that says na we might be getting distracted of the main things na we should be looking at. And one of the things I fear lang is, like, to the non-statistical capable people, yung mga sample sizes that we see from the statistics, I'm not sure how robust they are. So we've seen naman even Rome, who lasted for many years, they still fell as a nation. So parang one of the things I look at is when it comes to the cha-cha, I don't view it as a opinion, but more of me being naive. Are they doing it for the goodness of the country or not? And like yung sabi nung the guy with yung nasa chair, gray shirt, he says that corruption is not solvable. Although I kind of wish it is, because we're living here. But I'm also aware that even in Rome, there was still some level of corruption. Maybe one of the things we want to achieve is we want to lower yung amount of corruption. And one of the things na parang gusto ko lang ma-propose, and I'm quite curious to know lang if it's something you've all considered at some point, is yung attention to municipality levels. Maybe that's one of the corruptions we should look at. We tend to look at the higher levels, pero I don't hear people condemning their own cities if mali yung patakbo. And maybe it's kind of noisy here sa Manila kasi we all get to be verbal and we're quite smart. But what about the people in the provinces that can't really speak up? And maybe yung mga structural changes that may or may not require a cha-cha. Pero those are the things I kind of want to see parang progress siguro as thinkers in this room. Yeah, that's all I want to share. And when it comes to the FDIs, I don't know if the sample sizes are enough to say that it's statistically significant or insignificant. But one of the things I kind of want to know is maybe there are ways that maybe it can work, the FDI, maybe it doesn't. Pero I'm pretty sure the profit maximizing foreign people would not ruin our country for their profits. And they would probably visit us and maybe live here in because if it's very prosperous. Maybe one of the things that I speculate is with the FDIs is we need the FDI, hence the negative correlation because we're still poor. But progressive countries or rich countries don't need the FDIs because they can stand on their own. And I don't know if that's something robust. I don't have the numbers for it. But one of the things I want to see is yung mga counterfactuals, and I kind of look forward sa mga papers nyo and news articles sa mga ganung bagay. And one of the things I hope is maybe one of the ways we address yung corruption is if we can decentralize in a way na we put oversight sa municipalities. Maybe that would give life sa mga entrepreneurs, and to that entrepreneurs, mababawasan yung need for foreign direct investments because they can stand on their own. Those are the things I want to see. And most of all, with the FDIs, one of the things I'm most afraid of is there's a possibility na ma-concentrate pa rin siya sa a few handful of people. Kasi not everyone has the capital. Maybe we don't have the right tools that facilitate proper entrepreneurship to some level. And I wonder if Chacha would have a necessary impact if that progresses, or it's not even necessary. But this is me saying because one of the things that we worry about Chacha is the corruption. And one of the objective things I want to look at is, does it really reduce yung corruption index or anything if changes are made? Because one of the counterfactuals we have today is our constitution right now is not being enforced well. Kaya mataas yung corruption index. And I just like to share lang yung sentiments ko with everybody na it's a difficult process, and I hope na you guys, yung leadership nyo would be something na would guide us all well as students.
Thank you. Toby, quick response. No more, Ashelo.
Well, if your country is run by someone who doesn't want to return the money that they stole from the government, of course, corruption perception will be really high, right? That's number one. And then second, if you see oligarchs capturing a lot of industry, that would also contribute to perception of corruption. There are several initiatives that are being done in terms of addressing corruption, very specific policies that can help improve corruption perception, both at the national and international and subnational level. In fact, there are already existing provisions of our laws that provide space for private individuals and civil society to participate in governance, and a lot of trainings are being conducted. So if you want to participate in those, contact me and I will work with you on that, because we do I give trainings at the subnational level with community individuals on how to monitor local governments. So if you want to do that, contact me.
Now I was gonna say actually FDI, a lot of the FDI of course goes to Asia, but they also go to the more developed countries in Asia.
Yeah.
Just so you know, and we also send FDI out. So it's not true that it's only the low-income countries and middle that need FDI. FDI doesn't go where it's needed. FDI goes where they can make a profit.
Kaya nga maraming SM sa China eh. Anyway, sige, on that note, thank you guys for coming this afternoon. Thank you, Toby, for the presentation and the co-authors for joining in. I hope it was a very fruitful talk for everyone. So we have snacks dun sa student lounge. So we invite everyone to please proceed dun sa student lounge for some refreshments or dinner/dinner. So ayan, thank you guys again for coming.